Pearl Harbor, Midway, pivotal moments in U.S. naval history. But a century ago, on September 8, 1923, on a moonless night dripping with fog, the greatest peacetime disaster in the Navy happened along the treacherous California Central Coast. In less than 10 minutes, 7 U.S. destroyers of the Pacific Battle Fleet and 23 souls were lost. This dangerous area of jagged rocks and underwater pinnacles just north of Point Conception has been historically notorious to mariners. To local fishermen, it's called Honda Point. Sailors call it the graveyard of the Pacific. But to early Spanish explorers, this teeth of rocks and pinnacles was La Quijada del Diablo, the devil's jaw. So what happened? What went so horribly wrong? Were clear warnings disregarded and new navigation technologies ignored? Did the Navy's chain of command play a crucial role? Human hubris? Or could this incident be blamed upon unpredictable natural phenomena? To better comprehend such a tragic blunder that led to one of the greatest disasters in maritime history, let's first set the stage. As part of the Pacific Fleet summoned north from San Diego to Puget Sound were Destroyer Squadrons 11 and 12, under the command of Commodores Captain Edward Watson and Captain James Toome. This fleet's Clemson-class destroyers, commonly called flush decks, were each 314 feet long and carried 120 strong sailors as full crew. Known for their maneuverability, tough armament, and an impressive top speed of 35 knots, these destroyers were at that time the elite class of ships in the Navy.
The Clemson-class destroyer was designed during World War I, and it was basically a slight modification of the Wicks class, which was kind of the destroyer that was the most prevalent actually during the war. The big threat during World War I was German U-boats. And the way to counter U-boats is not with battleships, but with destroyers, small, fast, nimble ships that could escort convoys and have the weapons necessary to deal with submarines.
Officers refer to these lethal, lightly armored destroyers as the Greyhounds of the Sea. Sailors called them by a much more colorful nickname, Tin Cans. Meeting with all of his captains in San Francisco, Squadron Commander Rear Admiral Cattell was worrying over several propulsion issues that some destroyers had encountered on their voyage to and from Seattle. To address these engineering challenges, he ordered Squadrons 11 and 12 to make a hard-charging endurance run to San Diego.
Depart San Francisco 0700 hours, September 8, 1923. Rendezvous of San Francisco lightship and proceed to San Diego on cruising turbine at standard speed of 20 knots.
Admiral Cattell's order for a hard, high-rev run of 20 knots all the way to San Diego would prove to open the door to the disastrous chain of decisions, all adding up to the Devil's Jaw disaster, because it wasn't only his directive alone, but largely how that order was interpreted so differently by the two squadron commodores, Watson and Toome.
Destroyer Squadron 12 interpreted the 20 knots as permission to go at that speed, whereas Captain Watson and Destroyer Squadron 11 interpreted as that's what he was expected to do.
Captain Watson had additional pressure on his mind for racing down to 20 knots, because if his Squadron 11 could set a new speed record from San Francisco to San Diego, he could perhaps make up for a black eye he had just earned in Puget Sound. Because during the Pacific Battle Fleet gathering, his squadron's newest destroyer, the Zaylan, had collided with the USS Henderson, the very ship carrying President Harding. So leading up to that fateful summer of 1923, he was considered a likely candidate for promotion to the rank of Rear Admiral. So to rescue his reputation, that speed record was powerfully enticing.
That certainly was never taught at the Naval Academy, that one of the things you want to do with a ship and a whole group of ships is to set some speed record.
Commanders Toome and Watson both heading to San Diego. Toome planned Desron 12 for a deep water course around the Santa Barbara Channel Islands, while Watson decides to take the shorter, trickier route, threading the needle between the islands and Point Conception, the critical left turn.
The quickest, most efficient way to get from point to point is to hug the coastline instead of going into the deep sea areas of the Pacific Ocean. And so there's a small area of opportunity to only navigate that area between the California coastline and the Channel Islands.
The history of shipwrecks there is ongoing. It hasn't changed.
They knew this. These are guys who had sailed these waters hundreds and hundreds of times. So their boss should have said, I don't think it's a good idea for you to be taking that course. He should have said something right then and there.
While Toome had Squadron 12 depart during the calm of midnight, Watson chose to have Squadron 11 leave at dawn on the morning of September 8th, which would then set them up to reach the singular, dangerous eastward turn around the elbow of California on a dark and moonless night.
The guy who's getting there early should be the guy who's taking the slalom course, because you're going to be able to see the rocks, see the islands, and know when it's safe to turn.
There's an old saying, red sky at night, sailors delight. Red sky in the morning, sailors take warning. And as Squadrons 11 and 12 left before dawn on September 8th, the sky was blood red. Exiting San Francisco, Squadron 11 was initially using cruising formation 5 as a pack, but as they turned up the speed, they slipped into column formation 18, with squadron flagship the Delphi leading the charge.
They were doing a training maneuver, so they were in a long line, one after the other, so they're 200 to 250 yards apart. You're going to get a little faster that way because you're going in the wakes of one another.
Well, Captain Watson's in the lead ship, and everybody's following him because he's their boss. If you're navigating in a formation steaming like that, you are focused like a laser on the orientation that you're prescribed to be with the ship in front of you. In effect, what they might have been doing is saying, your position is 1,000 yards astern of the ship in front of you, and when you're navigating, you're trying to maintain that exact orientation. What happens there is the navigation team gets so focused on the ship in front of them, they lose perspective on the safety of the ship.
Some of the sailors said that the West Coast fog was so thick that seagulls could stand on top of that fog.
Well, the fog laid in, and that obscured the lighthouses on shore.
The destroyers were steaming with no moon, very heavy fog. The actions of the ships, the directions they needed to take, were totally dependent on the navigator, his charts, his dead reckoning.
Inconceivably, the very night before their departure, Captain Donald Hunter, the commanding officer of the flagship Delphi, serving directly under Commander Watson, replaced the ship's trusted navigator, Lieutenant Junior Grade Lawrence Blodgett, who was very experienced with this exact tricky route. Captain Hunter pulled rank on Blodgett with the words, "The captain has big plans," because he wanted to be the navigator of the record.
Ego is not your amigo.
To complicate the seas even more, large following quarter swells are causing the ship's propellers to breach out of the water.
The screws are coming out of the water, and then they would cycle before going back in. So Watson and Hunter are estimating that they're moving south at 21 knots when they're actually probably only going 19. Combination of the seas and the wind, that's throwing off their calculation of where they think they are.
Adding more instabilities to the ocean was that only a week before, on September 1st, 1923, the Great Kanto earthquake of Japan created a 40-foot-high tsunami that destroyed Tokyo and Yokohama, killing over 140,000 people. And just like the Fukushima earthquake and tsunami of 2011, the entire Pacific Ocean was rocked. Therefore, the currents of the California coastline were shaking like a bathtub under Destroyer Squadrons 11 and 12. They were slowly slipping eastward closer to the coastline. But dead reckoning wasn't the only navigational tool at his disposal. Radio bearings from the Navy's new RDF station.
Just a few miles south of Honda Point, there was a lighthouse there, and they had just recently employed radio directions.
The way that radio frequency navigation works is that you've got a fixed point on the land, and it sends RF energy out. On the ship, you have a receiver that receives that RF energy, and it gives you a line of bearing back to that point of land. And that's all it is. It's a line of bearing. And you could be anywhere on that line of bearing, from 10 feet to 10 miles to 100 miles.
So with the heavy responsibility for navigating the entire fleet through the gap between Point Conception and the Channel Islands, Captain Hunter dismisses the RC information from the new technology and will not deviate from his dead reckoning.
You're not able to visually see the coastline, and so you're solely dependent on that dead reckoning technique.
Because of the wall of fog and the moonless night, the Delphi is unable to detect lighthouse beams. and the high seas and winds create enough noise to smother any foghorn. Blodgett again urges Hunter to slow down and take depth soundings, but clear orders have been given by Commodore Watson.
No interference with the speed record.
I'm assuming that Captain Watson was a pretty feared leader. None of his commanding officers was willing to say this is unsafe.
There should have been a discussion on the bridge before they made the turn.
And they are running out of time. Hunter deems it time for a hard turn eastward into the eye of the needle between the Channel Islands and Point Conception. At 9 p.m., Watson gives the order to change course to 095 degrees true. At this moment, the Delphi is only 1.5 miles from shore, and this moment becomes fatal. Like a car hitting the brakes on ice, the emergency stopping distance of these Clemson-class destroyers racing at 20 knots is approximately 600 yards, and on this night, they don't even have that far of visibility. The sudden turn of the Delphi also startled the other ships because the change of course came without preface, no countdown, and not even communicated over the radio. They just turned. And then at 9:06 p.m., the Delphi smashes into the teeth of the Devil's Jaw and hits California. The deck log from the USS Farragut reads,
At 9:01, guide changed course to 095 degrees without previous signal. At 9:05, changed course to follow. It hardly settled down when sirens sounded ahead and ships began to break formation. The ships ahead were on the rocks.
And like a freeway pileup, they all smash in right behind the Delphi.
The USS Young was first to be ripped apart under the waterline by the underwater pinnacles along the Devil's Jaw.
So the rocks ripped a hole from the bow to the stern in that ship, and she was on her side in a 90-degree angle in 90 seconds. And 20 of the 23 sailors that we sadly lost in this incident were aboard the Young. And I believe most of them were probably below deck in the fire and engine rooms and just got washed out to sea.
They're all tending to their particular duty, and the side of the ship opens up and water comes flooding into it. They try to get out, you know, there's various hatches and things, and the water just trapped them. So it flooded and it capsized, and that's where most of the sailors that died were in that engine room.
20 sailors on the Young lose their lives right then in only 90 seconds.
Welcome everyone to the World Famous Adventures Club of Los Angeles. I'm here tonight with Lee Abbott, the producer of this documentary. Thank you for sharing that with us, Lee. And it's my understanding this is a teaser, a 14-minute video of a feature-length film that you made, correct?
Yeah, it's an hour-and-a-half film, and it's fun because like this leaves on a cliffhanger of like, boom, they hit and they're down. The most beautiful thing about this is just like any disaster from the Twin Towers to anything is the rescue.
Yeah.
You know, it really is the best thing of mankind, you know, and what they went through to save each other and the community, and there's so much more story that happens after that moment.
And this is a somewhat unknown disaster that happened right here in California. Like this happened, yeah. What is this? This is probably 100 miles from here?
Yeah, a little bit more. It's north of Santa Barbara, about 40 miles. If you know where, it's at Vandenberg Air Force Base.
Right.
What is now Vandenberg, it's that property. You know, and so that's why also up until, you know, recent times, 70s, 80s, people could still scuba dive it, but now it's a little bit more protected, you know.
So what I'd like to do, tonight I'd like to talk about the incident and kind of get your take, having interviewed all these people and made this film. And then I want to talk about the experience that you had making this and researching this as like a historian and archaeologist.
Oh man, God, it was a gift. I mean, first of all, this came to me. This wasn't something that I set out to go get funded. And like, you know, a lot of other projects, I have a good idea and I say, okay, let's go get money. There was a producer that I had been trying to work with for like a decade that it hadn't aligned, and this project came to her because she knew Bill Moores, the older gentleman in the film. Bill Moores, World War II veteran. He was in Saipan ready to do the mainland invasion of Japan when we dropped the bomb. So what would have been the Normandy beach invasion of Japan, he was a Navy Seabee, ready to make the landing docks and everything.
Yeah.
And so his life literally got saved, by that. But he was born and raised in Hollywood. He grew up free diving, snorkeling, and spearfishing the coast of California. And in the 70s, he scuba dove the wrecks. And his wife passed in January of 2020. They'd been married like 65 years. And he really had lost a lot of zest for life when she passed. But this was his swan song, and he wanted to tell this tale. And
how was he connected to that? Just because he did so much diving in the area and he was aware
because
of
the diving, because he dove the wreck. He actually dove with Dan Purdy, who there's a great story in the feature film about finding the ring of Captain Calhoun of the Young, the ship that got split like a butter knife, by the jagged rocks underneath and went down. He was the captain of it, and he had literally just gone to bed when they hit the first reef and just bunny hopped. But he had just taken his ring off and put it on his nightstand. Here's the thing everybody just has to understand. Everybody was going to bed. Everybody's in their skivvies. They're in t-shirts and boxers when they go down on the California coast in 50-degree air and 50-degree water and oil and fire and the whole thing. These guys were in the water dressed for bed.
Right.
So he had just put his ring on the dash, so obviously he loses that when the ship goes down. He was accommodated later for his acts of heroism in saving people. He then went on to serve honorably in World War II. A lot of these guys did. A lot of the lessons learned from the disaster got passed on to World War II. But then in the early 80s or whatever, he'd know better because he dove with Dan Purdy. Dan found the ring. And
that's amazing.
Because of the Naval Academy inscription, he was able to track down the family. He didn't keep it for himself. He tracked down the family. And Captain Calhoun had passed, but he gave it to his wife. And we enter Calhoun's daughter in the film. And she has the stories about how Dad never talked about it, et cetera, about how much it meant to her mother when she got the ring back. And we actually shot the ring for the movie. We have it. So we've got that beautiful full circle.
That's pretty
of
cool.
That. So this movie was an absolute gift. I consider it one of the blessings of my personal and professional career. And it just came to me. It was, thank you very much,
That's very cool. So I want to talk a little bit about the incident. We got an overview of it.
Mm-hmm.
But kind of walk me through it. They were in San Francisco.
Yeah.
They'd come down from Washington,
Puget
right?
Sound, yeah.
So who was the commander of the Destroyer Squadron again?
Well, this was Watson. Quick backstory. This was, the 20s. After World War I, the budgets were slashed. People didn't want to talk war. The country was sick of it. Everybody was tired of it. Budgets were slashed. And so basically our Navy was on rations. So that meant they had to putt-putt everywhere at like 10 knots.
Yeah.
Right? So President Harding at the time, as a part of a publicity stunt, had a review of the entire Pacific Fleet in Puget Sound. And they got everybody to come to Puget Sound.
So everybody got to gas up.
Exactly.
Right?
It's exactly right. Suddenly money got free. Hey, let's have some gas.
Sure.
So Admiral Cattell was like, hey, if we got gas, let's do some real training. Everybody, floor it. Let's go. And let's practice fire drills. Let's practice all this stuff. So they did some hardcore training, found they were woefully unprepared. Right? So that's on the way out to Puget Sound. And then what we talk about was then, Captain Watson's other ship, the Zaylan, actually hit President Harding's boat.
Not good.
Not good.
Was he on board?
He was on board. He was asleep. He didn't wake up. He was told about it at breakfast the next morning. The Henderson that he got hit on was okay, but the Zaylan had to go into dry dock to get fixed. It was that powerful enough of a hit. Now, here's some really trippy backstory, too. President Harding was supposed to sail to San Francisco, but he was feeling a little sick. So he took the train. He gets to San Francisco to the Palace Hotel and dies. That's where he had his heart attack. Now, there's backstory to think that his wife poisoned him. I mean, there's like the backstory intrigue is gnarly, and about how the Secret Service at the time had like his lovers on this part of the train, his wife's on this part of the train. They're keeping them apart. The wife, like whatever, but like the omens that kept happening around this disaster were so many.
Right.
So it was just kind of interesting. So anyway, so Watson has this black eye that he hit the president's ship. They all sail to San Francisco for Fleet Week. So everybody, that's the other part that you don't want to talk about too much, is everybody's partying really hard and then they leave at dawn, right? But so he really wanted this speed record because he was up for promotion and he had this black eye. So he's like, I got to show everybody that I'm a badass.
Yeah.
Ego's not your amigo.
And I'm not sure if this clip was in there. Was this clip in the 14-minute video about talking about how they misinterpreted the orders?
That was in here.
Yeah.
That was in here. So that's Watson and Toome. So Squadron and 11 and 12 were the entire Pacific fleet of destroyers, 2 squadrons. So Toome goes, I'm going to take the order of 20 knots to mean I can go that fast. And, Watson takes it as that's my minimum.
Yeah.
Right? And then also Watson wants the record, so he's going to slide down the coast as tight as possible, slalom between the Channel Islands and Santa Barbara, but then when you're behind the Channel Islands, the seas are calmer, so you can go faster. So when Toome takes the outside route, it's heavier swells, and we had this quartering sea, which we talked about. So heavy swells on a quartering sea, which is pushing, the ass end of your ship like this, and it's causing the propellers to breach.
Now let's watch that clip real quick. I think we have the route clip, so everybody understands like where these guys were going. It'll pop up.
It wasn't only his directive alone, but largely how that order was interpreted. So
let's go to the next one, the next clip.
Commodores, Watson, enters Toome and Watson both heading to San Diego. Toome planned Desron 12 for a deep water course around the Santa Barbara Channel Islands, while Watson decides to take the shorter, trickier route, threading the needle between the islands and Point Conception, the critical left turn.
At that distance, it really seems like it's close, but you got a good 20 miles.
Yeah, it's 25 miles. Yeah, exactly. But something else that we talk about in the movie is that morning, the Cuba, which was a luxury liner coming up from Southern California and Mexico, runs aground on San Miguel that morning.
Because there's just so much fog.
Yeah, there's so much fog. And then the other thing is, of Squadron 11, there's 3 Desrons. So when they showed the pack and then they split, there's 3 Desrons. Desron 1, 2, 3, okay? Basically 5 ships in each.
Yeah.
Okay? So in the end, 9 ships run aground, 2 were able to back off, so 7 are lost, right? But the guys at the back don't, right? But when the Cuba goes ashore, earlier that morning or the night before, one of their squadron had engineering problems, and so it left early just to kind of putt home. But when the Cuba crashes, they go to help in the rescue effort. And as they're there, they're on the radio saying, hey, we're helping a distressed ship, and maritime law is you're supposed to go help. And he calls back to Watson and says, hey, can we have some help? Watson says, no. We're on a record run.
Yeah.
5 ships back, I'm just blanking really quick on the captain. He goes, I want to help, but he was also disagreeing with the radio bearings and all this stuff. But when he got shut down publicly over the radio in front of everybody, and basically his hat is handed to him for wanting to help, later on when his navigator says that we're off course, he doesn't share it with Watson.
Yeah.
A very petty move. Like, really? You're not going to listen to me? Wah.
You know what? I'll tell you what. Like what year did this happen again?
1923.
1923. I was in the Navy from 2003 or 4 to 2010. And every incident that we studied that is happening like contemporaneously with my service happened the exact same way.
Right.
There was a Commodore, probably, right? Or someone that wasn't actually the skipper of the ship. Right. There was a Commodore, and there's always some ensign or Lieutenant JG who's the nav, and he gets shut down, and Captain, Commodore has the con or whatever.
Yeah.
And then he's like, "Oh, sir, maybe," and he's like, "Shut up, kid."
Yeah.
And then the next thing you know, they hit something, right?
Yeah, and
that's how it happens every single time.
Every time.
Right? Like you listen to these things and it's almost, it's eerie.
It's playbook.
And it's a playbook. It's the playbook. It's a Commodore that's got something going on that has some sort of like external pressure.
Yeah.
And everybody else on the ship is like, well, oh well.
Yeah. Well, something really obscene. Watson's in the lead ship, the Delphi, and like, there's one left turn. One. Point conception, left. That's it.
Yeah.
He was in his cabin with a civilian guest that wasn't supposed to be on board.
Male or female?
Male.
Oh.
But he was actually the ambassador to Japan, who was there for the Kanto earthquake, who got evacuated. He later ended up getting kidnapped before World War II and had to be, free, like all this stuff. But they were actually talking about Japan in how they were becoming a military threat. And part of the West Coast military parade was to show Japan, don't fuck with us, because they were building up pre-World War II. They were building up their China invasion.
Right.
And we were going, what's going on over there? So Captain Watson, in his benefit, he wanted to talk to this ambassador to say, what the hell's going on? They also were old friends. So they ran into each other in San Francisco, and he goes, hey, why don't you hop a ride with us to San Diego? Because he was going to San Diego anyway, whatever. There's more stuff there. But here's the thing. You got one turn, and you're in heavy fog, and you're not on the bridge.
Yeah, at least your navigator should be on the bridge. I'm not sure about the
navigator but at the same time, the navigator was so Watson's the Commodore, Hunter is the captain, but he replaces Blodgett, the navigator, because he wants to have navigated the speed record.
Yeah.
Again, ego.
And this poor JG, he's, that's his only job.
Not only is it his only job, but he's done this route hundreds of times. He's done this route over and over and over again, and Hunter had never done it.
And how was he calling that turn? Do you know how, like, was he using the rate?
He was doing dead reckoning and off of his own stopwatch.
But was he, because the radio direction finding...
He ignored it.
That was new.
He said it was newfangled and it was confusing and he didn't want to listen to it and he trusted himself.
But the JG wasn't.
No, he wasn't, and neither were the other ships behind him that were going, excuse me, we got the same rating you just did, and we're not where you think we are.
Because generally when you're making a turn, right, like you often turn, like, it discussed how a radio is just a line of bearing.
Correct.
But you commonly call your turns off of just a line of bearing. Right, you'll have some range on land, like at this point, when that lighthouse lines up with that tree.
But they had no lighthouse.
Or if that house lines up with that tree.
Yeah.
But it's the same thing. You wait till your radio bearing reads, something less than 0.95, right?
Well, I'll give you the check and balance. The sailors on board the bow heard the waves crashing against the shore.
Yeah, so you're way too close.
You're way too close.
Yeah.
So I don't care what your line of bearing is, you're close on that line of bearing.
So that was my other question. Like, you said they could hear it, because I kind of assumed that these ships were so noisy that you can't hear that kind of stuff.
Boom. I mean, the surf was huge that night. The swells were big. I mean, remember, they're calving on their props. I mean, it's big.
Right.
So that was not a easy night, which was the other thing that when they ended up in the water and on the rocks that they were getting beat. It was bad.
Yeah, that's crazy, because I know, I have limited experience sailing on the West Coast, but I know that, it's deep, but if you can hear waves, you're too close.
You're close.
Right? Like you may still be floating, right? But I mean, you soon will not be floating. Versus the East Coast, you can run aground thousands of yards from any land.
Yeah, exactly.
So you have to be tighter with your nav. But
this particular point, what's so gnarly about it is that, these are underwater pinnacles. So you've got spires.
Yeah.
So it's not just like I've got rock outcroppings, I've got this under there. And so like again on the Young, what he felt was an outer reef. He actually hit before the Delphi hit shore. So the second ship back hit, on a swell off the rocks before the front ship hit the shore. And that's what made, Captain Calhoun get out of bed and run to the bridge right before then they really got shredded. So, and then what happens is because there's basically a 405 pileup, they were all too close. And also because of the fog, they could maybe barely see a red light of the mast in front of them, maybe. And then all of a sudden they see this. you know? And at first they thought, man overboard, what's going on? And then they hear all the noise and all the stuff, but they were just boom, boom, boom. And they were lucky that several of them were able to turn, like, again, sheer left and go into that little bay and run aground there on the beach instead of right into the rocks. But some of them hit each other, you know? So it was just awful.
It does surprise me that out of all these ships, right? Because if this happened, right, and like if I'm the CO, the XO, the navigator, or even a JG on one of those ships, and I hear that go down over the radio, where, like, you know, the Commodore has, you know, I'd be like, all right, I'm still gonna watch, and I'd be puckered. You know what I mean? Like, I would not be, like, I'd be basically saying, like, listen, everybody, we all just heard what happened. Everybody be on guard. Take your own fixes. Yeah. Right? We're following the guy's wake. Right. But everybody keep your own fix. Yeah. And if something looks fishy, you just be ready to, you know, all back full. Right.
Well, any of us who've been at the ocean at night, you know, you don't really see a wave come in, you just see new white. You see the white water, right? And so when they were following a white V. You know, they could not see the ship in front. Right. They're following a white V, and they're just staying in the middle of it, which is also the calmer water. As soon as they get off of that, you know, it's rougher. But then all of a sudden, because they didn't even announce the left turn, they just turned. The next boat's coming, and all of a sudden he sees the wake go like that. Oh, shit.
Yeah.
Right? Because they were actually practicing radio silence. Again, they were in a battle footing. That's what they were practicing, was a battle footing, that they were on radio silence at full speed.
I think we have that clip for radio silence. I want to watch that real quick.
Yeah.
That radio silence clip.
Contributing factor was when they left San Francisco, Commodore Watson instructed everybody, radio silence, follow in my wake, which is relatively standard, but I mean, again, in a fog bank, in rough waters.
Part of the problem with the organizational structure of the Destroyer Squadron 11 is that the construct to navigate an entire squadron like that was dependent on one ship. It was the one flagship.
So,
yeah, I mean, for me, again, that's all well and good, but I like, you guys all take your own fixes, right? Like, I wouldn't be like, oh, copy that, we'll just follow him. Like, my whole nav team would be. Yeah.
But that's exactly what came up in the court-martial. Was because in the court-martial, they said, even though you were following orders, every captain's responsible for his own ship.
Yeah.
Period. And in fact, I'm blanking on his name right now, Leslie Bratton, was back like ship 12, and he was calling for his own radio bearings. And he was disagreeing, even though he wasn't able to say, but he was far enough back that he was able to kind of pull out as it went down. He actually ended up being one of the JAGs on the actual court-martial. They actually moved him to be one of, because they're like, look, A, you were there, you know, and you were a lawyer, and he went on to have a very distinguished career in World War II and all this stuff. But he was like, again, disagreeing, but he was far enough back that he was able to do it. But the thing is, when the court-martial came down, there were 9 guys up for court-martial, and in the end, Watson did do the admirable thing and say, they were following me, they were following my orders, I'm falling on my sword, it's mine.
I think we have that quote from him, right? I don't think we saw this in the original one. Can we run that statement?
I don't want an acquittal. No, sir, I don't want it. For me to be completely acquitted by this court would be bad for the naval service, to which my father and I have devoted our lives. I believe that no man in charge of vessels of the Navy at sea should get away clear when 7 are wrecked and 23 lives are lost. I want punishment.
So what was the disposition for him?
Well, he and Hunter, the navigator, were both court-martialed. Hunter actually tried to get away with it that he wasn't navigating.
He tried to throw it back on the JG, I bet, right?
He tried to throw it back on the actual navigator, who then went, who also then got brought up on court-martial, because when he testified, he was like, well, I'm the navigator, and they're like, oh, well, then you're up for court-martial. He's like, wait, but I went that, you know, right? But in the end, it came out that he didn't, and it was okay. So basically, Hunter and Watson got court-martialed, but all they really did was get a certain amount of demerits, and their career was done. But they didn't get any other punishment. They no longer advanced.
Yeah.
That's it. No promotions, no nothing. They got to still serve. They served out their whatever, but they were done.
Hopefully not teaching nav.
Yeah,
Or maybe teaching now.
Well,
I don't know.
but Hunter was teaching Dead Reckoning at the Naval Academy.
Yeah.
The guy who crashed everybody was instructing at the Naval Academy. The only thing is he was doing it in World War II, World War I. He was decorated World War I in the Atlantic, and then he did it in the South Pacific, but he had never done the California coast, which is a lot of sailors say is worse than Cape Horn. Like that Point Conception's gnarly because you've got the Alaskan Current, the Mexican Current. Like it's a wash tub out there.
Yeah, I think about it though, and like I'm thinking like, how would I navigate this? Because I don't know if you know this, but I took navigation in the Naval Academy, right? And I'm like, well, yeah, that sucks because we don't have a lot of the things. You don't have visual, first of all, which is huge. But you do have that radio, and I guess that was so new that people weren't into it. But I think let's look at their last fix because this goes to the point. There was a last fix that they got, and this was like way back, and it was one single fix on a lighthouse.
Closed in. The lighthouse at Pigeon Point dimmed as that last visible landmark for the fleet. Squadron 11 was left totally blind in the mists. Without stars or moon to navigate, a ship depends on its gyro compass for direction. But another strike against the squadron, the gyro compass of the Delphi leading the pack had just broken down, which meant lead navigator Captain Hunter is now relying on a merely magnetic compass and his Dead Reckoning experience.
He's got two handhelds. He's got a Boy Scout compass and a stopwatch.
Yeah, Dead Reckoning's not awful, right? Like, it's not awful. Like,
no, it's been here for 2,000 years. It works.
We sailed to Bermuda, from Massachusetts to Bermuda, and we were less than 50 miles off on DR.
Yeah.
Dead Reckoning the whole way.
Yeah.
And we went through the Gulf Stream and everything. But but the point is, there's the currents and everything, and it's not great, but you still do have, you got that last fix, which is just not a fix, a line of position. Right? Because one lighthouse gets you one line of position.
But that was the first of like 5. So number 1's gone, and you got nobody else to say it took me X amount of time from 1 to 2, time from 2 to 3, time like.
Yeah, because you got to account for the currents. But I mean, I'm sure that these guys were accounting for what they thought the currents was. But for me, if I was
the Kanto earthquake, the sea was
all over the place. Yeah, but I would have been all about that radio, that line of position.
Or if
I'd just be like, look, I'm not sure. Why they called for a line of position on it. I'm not sure why you're not getting that every 10 minutes. I would just be watching it all the way down. I'd be watching, boom, 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 boom. There we are, passing it.
What else came up during the court martial was that again, like because of when everybody tries to talk on the CB at the same time, you cancel everybody out, right? And so, the amount of communication with the radio, the radio station, because of the Cuba rescue, they were dedicating a lot of radio to that.
It's interesting.
So one of the excuses made by Hunter was, well, I couldn't get any information because
all these guys are chatting.
Yeah, but then there's Leslie Bratton back on number 12 going, I got her eating.
Yeah.
But they weren't sharing up and down the road because Watson just didn't want to hear it.
Well, radio silence or whatever.
And he's in his cabin, not on the bridge.
Yeah. That's crazy.
Yeah.
But I just know if I was on this ship, I would be so puckered this whole time.
Yeah.
Especially, I'd walk out on the bridge wing and one of my lookouts would be like, sir, I hear surf. And I'd be like, shit.
Yeah.
You hear surf? They're like, yeah, I'm pretty sure there's breakers right there. I'd be like, not cool,
Wait, I'm trying to set a record. Go ahead, do it. I'll be in my cabin drinking. See you later. Like,
that's
what?
crazy.
Yeah, which came up in the court martial. They were like, so was there alcohol involved? And his excuse was this is prohibition. He's like, no, there's no alcohol aboard a ship. Like, it's all too close quarters. We all know. Anybody would know if anybody's drinking.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Plus, we just sold it all in San Francisco.
Exactly. People are hungover. People haven't slept, So I think... To me, something that I want to bring up to everybody I think is really cool to see in the movie is okay, after it happens, the heroism is gorgeous. And not only from the sailors right there, but also from the entire community of Lompoc. There was the Southern Pacific Railroad had just recently finally completed the gap from LA to San Francisco right there at Lompoc to Surf, California. It would have been a big canyon, and they finally built a big bridge, and it literally had just gone through. And so there was a station house that the guy manning the station house out there all by himself in the middle of nowhere, what is now Vandenberg, literally goes out at night to have a smoke, and and he goes, "What am I hearing?" And it was the ding ding of the bells, and he could see. So he runs a mile down to the cliffs and sees it. And he runs back, ring, 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 and calls up the sheriff in Lompoc, and the rescue effort starts. And because the Cuba had just crashed on San Miguel, they all thought they hit the Channel Islands. Till a train came by.
But that just shows you how much, like, we thought we hit the Channel Islands, but these guys have been hearing surf the whole time.
Yeah. But I mean, waves on the backside of the Channel Islands.
They were literally 50 miles from where they thought they were.
Yes, 25. Yeah.
Well, because they would have had to be outside the Channel Islands to turn left and hit them.
That is true. That is true.
It's so crazy.
But again, on the reciprocal bearing, what Watson and Hunter said they thought was that they were already past Point Conception on the other side of the reciprocal.
Yeah.
So now they're turning in the gap. Again, 127 small things at any time somebody could have spoke up, and anybody's ego could have said, "You know what, I'm wrong. Let's just slow down for a second." Or let's just, especially radio silence, just talk to everybody. You'd have had 7 navigators go, disagree.
Yeah.
It's that simple. But again, I'm in my cabin and don't disturb.
It's so crazy. It's so...
Yeah.
But a lot of these stories go like this.
They do. But again, on the rescue, and again, it's in the feature. There's, top of my head again, I'm blanking, it's, whatever. But there was one sailor, who literally tied a rope around it and swam in that sea to another ship.
I think we have that clip.
Do you have that clip? Oh my God, it's amazing.
We have some clips.
After strafing the Farragut with the Fuller, Lieutenant Commander Walter Seed made several attempts to secure a line from the Fuller to the Woodbury and the rock it was stranded upon.
They're about 100 yards or so away from the Woodbury. So now they can see the sailors on the Woodbury right on these rocks, and so they're all getting off the ship and onto those rocks. On the other ship, one of the sailors says, "Why don't I take a rope and swim over there, and we could use that to pull the rope and get onto that ship, and then from there onto the rocks." Walter Seeds famously says, "That's too dangerous. It's roiling waters. I'm going to do it. If I make it, you follow me." And then he turns to his XO, hands him his hat, and says, "Here's my hat. If I don't make it, you'll be wearing 2 hats." But he does make it, and they get the rope over there, and that's how they get onto those rocks. And not a lot of rock out there, and they spent the night on that rock. Walter's distant cousin was here in Santa Barbara, Harris Seed. Harris told me that Walter was never the same after that tragedy.
Yeah. We interview also one of the heads of surgery at Cottage Hospital. Cottage Hospital helped in this. And when Southern Pacific train came through, they stopped, and they were a big part of the rescue effort. The immediate people were just triaged right on the beach, and bandages, broken arms and stuff. But the guys who were the worst, they put on a train and they took them to Cottage Hospital in Santa Barbara. But one of the biggest things they had a problem with was burns from steam. And then also because the crude oil at the time was really caustic versus now. So what was floating on the surface of the water was, even if it wasn't on fire, it's going to eat your skin alive. It was bad, So the guys, one of the things that Calhoun on the Young did was he said, "Do not abandon ship." He said, "Everybody, do not go into the water. As long as we're floating, don't go in." Yeah. And if they could get to the rock, they got to the rock, and they did that. But people wanted to just, I'll just swim ashore. He's like, "No. You're going to drown," and there were a few people that did do that. There were some guys that got on a life raft, they got swept out to sea and never got seen again.
Huh. That's crazy.
Yeah.
So there's some more, we have a couple more clips of the rescue effort, I think, in here.
Oh, cool.
I wanted to take a look at those. Or one of the ships actually tipped over, right? Didn't capsize, but went on its side.
Yeah, the Young.
He was on her side at a 90-degree angle and 90 seconds. And 20 of the 23 sailors that we sadly lost in this incident were aboard the Young. And I believe most of them were probably below deck in the fire and engine rooms and just got washed out to sea.
Yeah, because you mentioned in the film that they called these tin cans, right?
Yeah.
So when those underwater spots, literally ripped it open like a tin
butter
can.
Knife. Yeah, hot knife through butter.
And if you're below decks.
Yeah.
you know.
Like didn't even slow down. It just went through and, you know, but it just, and then there was another one, again, sorry, it's been a while, guys, but one of the back ships, the last boat to go aground, as it was coming in to try to like, you know, A, slow down, but also maybe help and still figure out what's going on. When the waves went up, the Young's propellers were out of the water and just opened it up again like a sardine can. Just
crazy.
And they went down too, you know.
I think there's another, go ahead and hit the next video here, Phoebe.
Stranded upon the crippled Delphi, Captain Hunter fears the ship may disintegrate and gives the order to abandon ship. While many of the men originally can jump to the rocks to save themselves, everything changes when the Delphi rolls over in the surf. Sailors fall into the caustic oil-covered water between the ship and the rocks. 4 men are pulled back onto the Delphi by Blodgett and the remaining crew. One of them is fireman James Pearson.
Yeah, Pearson. Think about doing 20 knots and suddenly stopping. People got thrown.
Yeah.
I mean, they just went up against bulkheads. And he had glasses, and the glass shattered in his eyes. And so he was screaming, he couldn't see, and then he's in the water, and they pull him out, and he had a total meltdown, panic attack. He was like dangerous to himself and others, and they lashed him to a mast. They like tied him down to it. And through the night, they're hearing him scream. And by the morning, he died.
Terrific.
And then everybody's hearing it. You know, but they couldn't get him ashore. They couldn't get him off, and it just like, so, yeah, it was brutal. But again, the rest of the story, the people who helped in the rescue, is really gorgeous.
That was your grandparents, right?
My grandmother was 16 at the time and living in Arroyo Grande, and they heard about it through the sheriff, and they loaded up the Model T with blankets and coffee, and they drove to the rescue site, and you know, helped feed the sailors, you know, because they came off, and Lompoc did the same. Moore Mercantile was the big general store in Lompoc, and they emptied every blanket, every coffee, every ham, everything they had, and they went out there in their Model Ts, and away they went, and they fed everybody and bandaged everybody.
Because this isn't developed California. This is Wild West.
Oh yeah, I mean Lompoc back at the time. I mean population 500. You know,
it's like if you're running around in southern Mexico or something.
Absolutely,
right? There's people around, but
not much.
Yeah,
not much. You know, but it's kind of neat hearing those. We were really helped by several historical societies. The Lompoc Historical Society was amazing and had all the old newspapers. And so in the movie, instead of recreating or a scan, or like we actually in camera shot the paper, you know, and you can see the actual newspaper of the time and the headlines and all that stuff. This was a national story. This was huge across the whole country.
But didn't they try to kind of downplay it and bury it a little bit as well?
They did, but here's the weird thing. There was a massive eclipse that same weekend, so all these photographers were in Lompoc because of that.
Yeah, hard to bury that
one.
The
API was there, you know, and so it goes down. You've got the press corps there. I mean, we've got British Path aerial footage. They flew a seaplane over in 1923, and we have footage from that. You know, those are the aerial photographs. You know, and so this was massive across the news. And then so was the court-martial trial. Was a big deal. Everybody was watching the court-martial trial. So the Navy really, with that black eye, wanted to play it down and just like kind of hush, 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 and that's why you didn't hear much about it. And then also after 10 years, they actually scraped everything below the waterline. So you couldn't see it anymore because the Southern Pacific Railway, that was my great-grandfather, he was the engineer of that. They would stop. And people get out and picnic and walk the beach and pick up trinkets and pieces of ship. And so the Navy was like, we don't like this. So they salvaged it and just kind of hush-hushed it. And then World War II happened, so people forgot about it. And it really wasn't until, you know, Jacques Cousteau and scuba diving that people go, hey, let's investigate this. Let's check this out.
And tonight we have an artifact here. From which ship was this? And what was your name again, sir?
I'm Ben Briggs.
Ben Briggs, and you actually dove on these wrecks?
Yeah.
And this is a combination of two portholes?
Yeah, like I say, they're identical portholes, but they were from two different spots. The one I got is probably from the Delphi.
Wow.
And Dan
Yeah.
Did a lot of diving on the young.
On that spot?
The Delphi
yeah.
and the Young.
Yeah.
So what year were these recovered?
Oh, God, no, I was asked that earlier. It's a while back.
I mean,
when it
80s?
was legal.
Yeah.
Yeah, 84.
Yeah.
Like that, something like that. That was
Did you guys know Charles
We're going
Sylvester?
to get you a mic real quick here so the people on the
Charles
channel can hear you.
Sylvester, did you know him? He was the baseball coach at Santa Barbara High forever. He was a former Brooklyn Dodger. That was my uncle. And he dove the wreck at the time. I would hear stories from him from diving the wreck, you know, when I was younger. And I started scuba diving when I was 12 in the Santa Barbara Channel, so I heard a lot of stories about it, you know, from Uncle Chuck. But I mean, I never dove it. And if anybody wants to know, that is like a horrible washing machine on spin cycle there. It is awful.
But real quick, because this is the Adventurers Club, how many people have been diving on this wreck? Oh, we got 3 in the audience tonight.
That's amazing.
That's pretty good.
Bravo to you guys.
And any of you guys have artifacts aside from this one? He's
got some more.
Steve Lawson, 1032's over here picking stuff out of
Steve,
his bag.
you dove with Dan Purdy, who found the ring, and you were on that dive?
Yes.
That's amazing.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
So I got to ask Steve. This is going to be an interactive Q&A, right?
Good.
We're going to ask some of these people. How did he find the ring with a metal detector, or
no? He was rummaging down there on the Young. I'll have some slides here. I'm not sure if we're ready for them or not, but
oh sure.
Yeah, we'll pop up a couple.
Yeah, so he came back from his 9th dive of the day. When you're diving 20, 30 feet, you can get away with that kind of stuff. And comes up and said, "Hey, I found a lock and a penny and a couple of things." And takes his glove off. He said, "I found a ring." And so he takes the ring off and he passes it around a couple of people, and he's taking his gear off. And all of a sudden, there's a mad rush for the galley. We're on the Conception, the same boat that burned up.
Yeah.
And then they look at a reference, Tragedy of Honda, and flip through it, and they find Calhoun's picture in there. And it's Captain's Annapolis graduation ring.
Yeah.
Right there, yeah. So you see it right here, and his initials are on it, and they're backwards, so we can make a wax imprint with it. And it says 06, the year he graduated, and his name is engraved on the inside of it.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's so crazy that was still down there.
And again, bravo.
And what
to you
year
guys.
was that, Steve?
84, 86, something like that.
Wow.
And here's a fuse from one of the 3-inch long guns.
Wow.
This is all World War I era, and it's got grabbed a couple of knickknacks, and there's a fork with USN on it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, you want to share?
And this is just right there. It's
and
crazy
so Bill, our 98-year-old World War II veteran, by the way, he passed before the movie finished. Awful. I got to be really close to him. But he had several artifacts that he'd found. He'd found some china, that had the emblem, and all that stuff. And he had some coffee mugs, and he had some really cool stuff in his personal collection that he had gathered. So I wish he'd have loved it.
I have a couple of slides if you want to share them.
Cool. Go for it. Go for it.
Well, if you return now.
Phoebe's right here, so we're going to have to wait 1 minute to go to the slide.
So Calhoun, we interviewed his granddaughter. She's in the movie, and she had stories about Grandpa.
And you actually got to film this ring a little bit.
Yeah. We actually went back to her family. It's with her brother, who's his grandson. So we went to San Diego just to shoot the actual ring, because the full picture of the story, was told by the family.
Yeah.
And he was very decorated. He got accommodations for his acts of heroism in the rescue, and then he went on to serve, honorably in World War II. He's one of those guys that, like, if you did a movie about him, it'd be amazing. So we had amazing support from the Department of Defense and the U.S. Navy and the Space Force at Vandenberg. For all the years that this was considered a black eye, this movie right now is being considered to be taught at the Naval Academy, which, again, on Speak Up.
Yeah. Or any of the, dozen or so instances has gone down exactly like this.
Yeah.
Like, exactly. It really is, like, I can't, like, when I was watching this, I was like, yeah, that was just like the Hartford, the San Francisco.
Exactly.
Or,
Exactly. Well, something really cool. So we shot this October of 2020 through, like, Christmas 2020. there we are in COVID. So I interviewed Tim LaFleur, who was not only a Rear Admiral in the U.S. Navy, but was the commander of the entire NATO surface fleet. Dennis Murphy in the movie was the commander of the entire Submariner Pacific fleet. These were hardcore guys. But when I had my first interview with Dennis, so when Bill Moores, our veteran, passed, he willed his estate, including the movie, to the Gold Coast Veterans Foundation, which is set to eliminate veteran homelessness in Ventura County. Dennis is now the president of that. And so when I interviewed him, he and I hit it off as nerds, had a good conversation. He picked up the phone and started calling admirals. Doors start opening.
Yeah.
And so we go to San Diego to interview Tim LaFleur, who was, with NATO, and he's the older gentleman saying, they should have known where they were going, but he picks up the phone and calls the base and just goes, hey, let these guys on. We got on a modern Zumwalt destroyer and got to interview the captain on the bridge during COVID. So we're there with him, and he goes, this almost happened to us 2 months ago.
Which is crazy because they have radar and GPS and everything else.
Everything.
And not just gyro compass, but gyro INS system, right?
Everything.
Like it's really hard to get lost on one
if our GPS can tell him 3 feet over there. Come on.
Yeah.
But no, he was talking about that they had come out of San Francisco and the fog was that thick and yada, yada. And they literally had some, ensigns out on the bow listening, and they heard.
Yeah, I've done that.
A tanker coming through, and they were just like, hey, we hear something that isn't showing up. And they were like,
how could a tanker not show up on a Zumwalt radar?
I don't know. Well, the Zumwalt didn't show up on the tanker is the thing.
Yeah, it's fine, right?
So the tanker might have turned, I don't know.
But the tanker's got AIS. The tanker's a giant.
But the beautiful thing is he then took it the next step. And he told his whole bridge and his crew, have you heard the story of Devil's Jaw?
That's cool.
And he tells them about it and how it happened. They used it as a teaching exercise because they're literally going the exact run. They were doing the exact run. So he tells them about it then as they make the turn, as they're going past Honda Point, they're like, okay, see, that's where it went.
Yeah.
Then they make the turn and they're like, and everybody's going, how did they miss that? Or like,
how'd you guys miss the tanker?
I know. So it's interesting because and Brock Connor, who's the guy who says ego's not your amigo. The movie Top Gun, you remember when he does the flyby of the tower?
Yeah.
He was the actual pilot who did it.
Oh, yeah?
He was the guy. He was really the guy who did it for the movie. He was actually the... And,
but he got permission for that, so hey.
Well, that was on camera. He was allowed to do that.
Yeah.
But he was on the aircraft carrier, the nuclear one off of San Diego when it gutted the inside off San Diego.
Yeah.
I forget. But he was on that. And same thing. They were waiting in the wind and the current for one more plane to land, and they kept going in.
Yeah.
And right down there, but close to the reactor, the nuclear reactor.
That's no good.
And they were like, okay, are we going to be okay? But he was like that close. But same thing, he said, this was all because of people not paying attention to why we have these protocols and egos getting in the way versus going, wave off the jet and pull out to sea and then try again versus, we can fit one more.
Yeah. It's always something. It's crazy. It's crazy that this stuff keeps coming back up.
It always
so
will.
I want to show you some of the pictures that Steve Lawson put in
please.
here. What's and Steve, chime in. What is this one here?
This is the deck of the conception.
He got this.
Yeah. And this is all the stuff that we pulled up on, I think, 2 days of diving.
You guys really looted that thing.
We preserve it.
Right. Yeah.
We recover it and preserve it. And in fact, one of those rings you see there in the lower left-hand corner is back here in the room.
All right.
Boiler inspection.
All right.
So cool.
Yeah. And then, the brass, even though it's been down there underwater for a century or more, you can still polish it up to make it look like gold.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I thought you said the conception, that went down 3 or 4 years ago.
Yes.
So this is more...
This is 80s.
Yeah.
In fact, you see me in the background. That gives you an idea how old this is. And Dan Purdy's sitting next to me there. His head's turned towards me. Yeah, Peter Jensen's right there.
Talk about full circle.
Yeah, against the left side. Can you see the next slide?
This is so cool.
I think that was the last slide.
There's 10.
Okay, here we
Oh,
go.
that's underwater, yeah.
Yeah, this is what the bottom looks like. So the iron holes or steel holes are totally disintegrated, and they form on the bottom what we call iron aggregate or conglomerate. and it's basically a big pile of rust in which is embedded all the brass.
Right.
And the site is phenomenal in that, as you mentioned, it's a wash machine. It's the area, off California coast, which is known for hazardous seas most of the time. You notice all this brass is shining. Okay, it's under constant washing and scouring action for the sand. All that is polished.
Yeah.
You dive down there. It is like all these gold ingots locked. There's the ring I was telling you about. It's back here in the room. All those brass, like gold ingots, locked into a lava flow. And you have to extract it with a hammer and a chisel to be able to free it. But it's amazing. We went down there, and here's an 8-foot diameter prop, looks like gold. And there's just piles of brass. These destroyers are almost made out of brass.
Yeah.
Can you still dive this site, Steve?
No, we tried to get in there a few years ago. Ever since 9/11, they pretty much shut it down.
Yeah.
I think the last commercial dive trip was probably back in the late 90s.
Yep.
Yeah, so here you see there's a 3-inch long gun shell. I have the fuse here. But, it's underwater. You can still see the date, 1917.
Yeah.
You can see the primer there. It's everything's live. There's field because they had all the ammunition on it. Here's one of the props off the Delphi, which there's an early salver there, Ernie Porter, up in Lompoc, that did a lot of work on the wrecks and recovered quite a bit. And here's the ring in the picture that goes.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
It's so cool. We were lucky that the on-base historian at Vandenberg was a big part of this, and it was one of his personal nerd projects. Like, he loved it. So when we reached out to him, he had so much data, and we were really fortunate. We worked a lot with the Santa Barbara Maritime Museum, Greg Gorda there, and he's actually who reached out to a lot of community members that were family. So a lot of our interviews were through him, and then getting in with the Lompoc Historical Society, and it just was amazing how much so many of the people in the community really wanted to tell this story before it was gone. So I feel really blessed.
Did you work with Bob Schwimmer?
Yeah.
Yeah. We had Bruce, I can't recall his last name, speak here when the last surviving people that were on them.
Yeah.
When the destroyers there.
Yeah. It's it was a blessing and a gift to be a part of. Period.
It's very cool.
Yeah.
Well, I'd like to open it up to questions now. If anybody has any questions in the audience. Hands shooting up, or comments about the
Go ahead.
portal.
Okay. All right. Can everybody hear me?
We need the microphone.
You got to use the microphone, yeah. Here, why don't you come and stand up here?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Oh, cool.
So, the ring was really phenomenal. Of course, it was really great that
Come in the middle here.
he was able to get it back to the family.
That's good.
But and artifacts are neat and all, and they look nice, and you make stuff out of them, and of course preserve them for people to see. But when there's a story behind it, it's really interesting. The destroyer crews back then were pretty rough and tumble people. Of course, there's no drinking because there was prohibition, but
they didn't.
Something must have happened in San Francisco, and the police were called, and one of the policemen that showed up to quiet down the destroyer crews was a gentleman by the name of Royal W. Hollingsworth. And we know he was there because there's his 7-point silver San Francisco Police Department badge that somehow ended up on the Delphi.
Wow. That's crazy.
That's awesome.
And
it's a trophy from San Francisco.
But you'll see that this porthole, and when you saw those pictures of the young rolled on its side, you can see the row of portholes. These portholes aren't big enough for a person to crawl through. So they don't make portholes that size anymore. They make them big enough you can get out of them. So.
Ooh, good porthole story.
Thank you.
Again, it bothers me that I'm forgetting his name, but the other sailor, not the one that was the captain that swam with the rope, the first guy to swim with the rope, he made several trips. They strung it between, but one of the things he did on the Young, he was on the Young, and it's on its side, and everybody's trying to hold on, and they're slipping off. He goes back in, swims underwater, gets a hatchet off the wall for fire, swims back out, and starts knocking all the glass out of the portholes. Takes a rope and strings it through the portholes so people have something to hold on to on the side of the boat. But he went under to go get it to come back out, and he smashed all the portholes, so it's pretty cool.
One more thing here.
Yeah, This is just a picture, a panoramic shot of a line of those destroyers.
Hold this in.
That class of destroyer. These aren't the actual ones, but you can see the formations, the way they are, ass to nose, and of course this is not pitch black, dense fog, so it gives you kind of an idea.
Wow.
Yeah, do 90 on the 405 about 10 feet behind somebody and in fog.
Yeah, right there. All right, questions? Peter?
So, segue to you, 7th generation Californian.
Yeah.
Who were the first, and when did they come here, and why?
Oh God, I've got one great grandmother who Irish potato famine, you know, and she sailed to Panama Isthmus and came across on a donkey, and then came up to San Francisco and opened a general store. So she was a 16-year-old entrepreneur during the gold rush. That was one of them. I've got a great grandfather who came over as a 12-year-old stowaway from Germany. You know, like they've all got those crazy stories. And I've got also on one side of the family, I can trace it back, matriarch line that my great grandmother had written down when she passed. I saw an envelope. She wrote all her mother, the matriarch line, going back to San Francisco, and then one in Michigan, and then Bristol, Connecticut, 1776. You know, and my name Abbott goes back to 1634 Virginia. So everybody was basically, you know, rancher, cowboys, you know, that's who my stock are.
Yeah, I got 3rd generation in California, but that's only a little ways back compared to you. So
Oh God, my grandfather was born 1898 on Signal Hill. And he had stories of riding the mule cart full of sugar beets to the farmer's market in downtown LA before he moved to the river Nacimiento, which then became Lake Nacimiento. Swall Drive, Beverly Hills is my grandmother's grandfather because they had the Rancho Rodeo de las Aguas, which was West Hollywood through Westwood, Beverly Hills. There was a cattle ranch, and they were getting stuck in that sticky black stuff. Yeah, but they were Irish. They were the Swall family, and so they bought it from the De La Guerras, you know. But like, there's Swall Drive in Beverly Hills still, you know. But then, you know, it's just crazy because
it's quite developed now, huh?
Yeah, a little bit. You know, but I mean, they were just poor farmers, man. It was dirt.
Nothing special. Now it's special.
Yeah.
Other questions over here? David, can you run that mic around for us, please?
Not really a question, but an observation that the Titanic wasn't so long before.
Right?
You'd think they might have read the maybe don't try for speed. You know, I just find that so
Hubris. I mean, I don't know. You should just be
hubris. You're like, right? Yes, right? On so many levels. You know, and again, that there was enough time. It's not like it was a 30-second decision. They left at dawn, and it happened at 9 o'clock at night.
Yeah, and throwing the speed record, not starting it. I think that is casually mentioned in the full-length movie, but why don't you, like, if you're going to hit that speed record, start at midnight.
Right.
Right? So you do your turn in daylight.
Yeah.
Right? Like, that's like basic, like,
right.
What time? And if you're some Commodore that's got, you know, some ego, you don't give a shit what time you leave. Be like, yo, we're leaving at midnight. And everybody's like, you know.
Well, also, if
I have a feeling that he was partying too. Because if you're in it to win it, you don't.
If you're Admiral Cattell, who tells Watson and Toome, go at 20 knots, and one of them says, yeah, I'm going to leave at 7 in the morning and hit it at 9. Really? Don't think so.
Yeah.
You know, like, there were so many people who could have checks and balanced that thing. You know, I mean,
Rich, wouldn't you have left in the middle of the night if you were hitting a speed record?
All depends upon
what
to expect.
Key turn in the morning.
You have one hurdle. You have one obstacle. You have one turn. What time of day do you want to hit it?
Did they have any other reference to tell them when to turn? Like if he didn't turn and run straight into the rocks?
Well, I mean, if you can look at the land.
Fog, if he's ignoring the radio direction finding, was there anything else?
Stopwatch.
But with a bad, if you don't know where you are,
There's nothing. You can't see anything.
That's why radar is
You know,
great.
like when you go out to like the San Joaquin Valley and you get Thule fog and you can see 10 feet in front of you, that's how bad it was. They could not see the bow from the bridge. From the bridge, they couldn't see the bow They literally were seeing the whitewater off of either side of their boat, of the wake of the boat in front. Ship.
There's one Navy radio direction finding link ashore, but aren't there commercial radio stations
Not then.
that could also take another cut
No.
off?
It was the only one. It was the only first one. So even if there had been a second one to get a triangulation, there was the only one, first
the
one.
ships were not fitted with much radio at all. The ship had direction finding, but there just weren't many.
And that was, I was unclear because it actually sounds like the direction, they said they called for a fix. Was the direction finding reported from the shore? Did they have to call the shore? So they got a ping and then
Yes, they call the shore, who sends a ping, and they read it on the ship. But they're using their current radio technology they use to communicate via radio to everybody.
But do they determine the direction based on a couple antennas on their ship, or does the shore?
They got a receiver, and where did it come from? And it
even
says
Amelia Earhart was broadcasting, and then the shore would say, "You're on the 270."
correct.
And Amelia would say, "I copy you."
But am I at 270, 500 feet from me, or 5 miles from me? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, that's where your DR comes in.
Yeah.
So you run that line of position into your DR.
But also part of dead reckoning is knowing how time late and how big your area of uncertainty is. Knowing I may be this far off.
But their main problem was by their RPMs, they thought they were doing 21 knots.
Yeah, apparently they didn't have like speedos.
Yeah. But also, even forget water, by ground speed, they were only doing 18 and a half-ish. So they were way behind where they thought they were. You know, and again, something else we go into the thing, depth finding. Hello, they had charts, and even if I'm the speed record, tell my guy in the back, hey, slow down and take a reading, because
they would have to drop a
plumb line. Basically, they didn't have like the radio bounce. They literally had to old school it, but that means you had to slow down to under 10 knots to do it. But all they had to do was tell the back guy to do it.
Yeah.
Hey, you slow down. Tell us where we are.
But then he might get lost, right? Because he's just following their tails. Who knows?
Yeah.
All right. Question, Bill.
Yeah, question regarding the, what time of year was it again?
September 9th, 1923.
Okay, so September in California is still warm. And so I live in Morro Bay area.
Yeah.
And I took the train, which goes right.
Yeah, right there.
Right there. It stops at Surf Lompoc.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and so when we left San Luis Obispo, actually, it was okay, but then when we got there, it was fogged in.
Yeah.
So my point is that fog in that time of year is almost unusual not to have fog. So if people were familiar with the weather conditions, to me, when it's like, oh well, we had this, and then all of a sudden there was fog, and so to me it's like, well, of course there's fog. You're on the coast of California in the summer or late summer. So that's my only point too in terms of observation. Like you say, there's probably 170 things that went wrong, and that could have been one of them. That they should have anticipated fog.
Yes, and that. For those of us who live up in that area, like wine country, when the inland valley is really hot, it sucks it off the ocean. If you've got a temperate day, it's not. So it can be 72 at the beach and 85 inland, but if it's 100 degrees inland, it's gonna pull it off the ocean, right? I did go and Google and actually look up what the lunar cycle was and find out it was a 0 moon that night. There was no moon at all.
Everything going against
that. Everything.
Well, I'll tell you what, from a Navy perspective though, Bill, I'll tell you my experience sailing in this region. The Navy sent me out to San Francisco and they said, deliver these sailboats north to Seattle in like the summer. And when we got there, they're like, which way are you going? We're like, north. They're like, that's like borderline impossible right now.
Right.
And we're like, oh.
It's the summertime.
This is when they sent us out here, so we're gonna go. And we got, I don't know, a couple 100 miles before we got beat back.
Yeah.
So the Navy doesn't care. But that being said, when you're in the Navy, you're supposed to train for that kind of stuff. You're supposed to train in adverse conditions. So I can say this guy in the fog, he's like, yeah, we're running 20 knots in the fog because that's what we need to learn how to do. Okay. So, but for all the other mistakes that are made, like you're supposed to train in austere conditions so that when it hits the fan, you're able to do that stuff.
Yeah.
But you're also supposed to scaffold your training so you don't get hosed.
Do it.
Right? So like,
Yeah.
you know, we didn't have such a hard mission to deliver some sailboats. So when it got too
Yeah.
tough, we're like, all right, well, you know, give it a good shot, you know.
You know what? For the Adventure Club, I got a quick story, and I'll make it quick. But it was cool that I was shooting with Discovery Channel about submarine rescue. That if a submarine goes down, it was called Code Red, and we shot it right before that Russian sub went down.
Oh.
And so I actually got to go with the Navy on a DSRV off the coast of San Diego down to 2,000 feet deep. That it's the 75-foot long DSRV with 3 chambers. There's a 4 chamber of the pilots and the mid chamber and blah, blah, blah. And so they turn and burn that thing down. And we, out on the bottom of the ocean floor, 2,000 feet deep, was a big concrete fake submarine hull that they could mate onto to rehearse, right? And so we go down and we hit about 1,900 feet. We're leveling off and we're coming down. And then all of a sudden, like the lights go to red, and I'm listening on the headset, and I'm hearing in there, what the? Red lights. I'm like, they're fucking with the camera guy. Until I look at like the midshipman, he's like, I'm like, oh shit, this
They're
is
messing
real.
with him too.
Yeah, I'm like, okay, whatever. What had happened was one of their external cameras had corroded after years of salt water and then shorted, and they actually had a dash fire. They had an electrical dash fire. Just smoke, but it went.
Doesn't matter. Fire on a sub, no
Yeah,
good.
exactly. But so we're dead in the water. Now it's positively buoyant, so over time we would have eventually come up. But honestly, it was like, oh shit, right? So they fix it, and it took us about 3 hours, and then they're like, okay, have to finish the mission.
Yeah.
Went down and finished the mission.
Yeah.
And so we actually coupled onto the bottom of the floor, opened the hatch, and I got to hop out and stand on the bottom of the ocean floor.
That's so cool.
It was fucking cool. 2,000 feet deep. It was cold, but
Yeah.
it was really cool. And I had tied a styrofoam coffee cup onto the hatch on the outside, and it was crushed to a thimble. Brittle little plastic thimble. It was really cool. But
That's wild.
That was, but mission accomplished.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because the incident that just reminds me of most was the USS Hartford, which is a sub. Mm-hmm. And it was so similar because a Commodore was on board and he wanted to drive, and he was up in the sail driving, right? And the navigator was calling turns, and he didn't believe the navigator or whatever, and they overstood one of their turns, and then the next turn they hit an underwater mount.
Yep.
And crushed their sonar dome.
Yep.
Now it's crazy because I'm not sure how fast.
Wasn't
it was
that in Asia
transiting.
somewhere? Was it?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I remember
But it's a nuclear submarine,
right?
And I talked to guys that were on it, and they got banged up, like the guys in the torpedo room, hit their faces against torpedoes and stuff like that. But
concussions.
Surprisingly, not that big of a deal.
And it was
considering
hush-hush. Yeah.
because it was probably going around 20 knots. I don't know how fast it was going, but it's a big boat.
Yeah.
And it's so similar. It's crazy. They should teach this stuff. They should use your movie and be like, don't do this.
Well, that's
it
the
should
plan.
be in
Yeah.
everybody's head, every officer's head, that when this situation develops, you watch yourself.
Yeah. Something that did change since the event leading into World War II was after a disaster, they literally learned to question the lowest man on the totem pole to discover in triage, did anybody speak up? And if the lowest guy said something and was ignored, that was really bad on the top guy, that somebody spoke. And if somebody says, I was next to him when he said it. So those things have changed, which is good.
And they have bridge audio too. I've heard some bridge audio of that going down, and you're like some JG or something, it just gets into a little spat.
Oh yeah.
And then eventually the ensign or the JG is just like, aye, sir. And then because what's coming, right?
Yeah.
And you just hear this little tiff
hear the tone
between the CO and the junior officer, and then you hear the junior officer give up.
Oh yeah.
And you're like, oh, it's so damning,
Yeah.
It's crazy.
But
All
there's
right, more questions out there.
Yeah, and then we can wrap it.
It's been about over 40 years since I've researched anything with Honda, but if I remember, when I researched that 23 was an El Nino year. So that may have been
yes
affecting it as well.
Yes. The Alaskan current and the El Nino current were colliding on that exact spot.
Correct. Referring back to what Ben was talking about with the portholes, smashing out the portholes, there are 3 different size ports. There's a larger port, this is a medium port, and then there was a smaller port, which was about 8 or 9 inches in diameter. Those were the ones that they were smashing out with the fire axes, but the sailors could not get out because the ports were too small. One result of this was that after this disaster, all of the vessels that were built, all Navy vessels that were built with standard Navy 14-inch ports.
Yeah.
They went to a minimum size of 14-inch so that this would never occur again.
Yeah.
But also, question for you. Do you know what Mrs. Calhoun's first words were to Dan when he called her?
No, I gotta know.
Okay, a little backstory.
Because she's passed, so I didn't.
Right.
Yeah.
Did you know Jerry Bastion?
Name only.
Okay. Little backstory on this. So, as Steve said, we were doing our 8th and 9th dive of the day. It was the second day that we were diving. It was incredible conditions. You could look over the side of the Conception and see the polished, high-speed blades of the propeller of the Woodbury. I mean, it was just, incredible. Usually diving up there, the water is cold, you have lingcod, it's maybe 2-foot visibility. But we were on the second day of diving, 8th and 9th dive. Dan and I, we were actually working in the same area, and we were getting suited up. It was about 4:30 in the afternoon, and someone said to Dan, "You're going in again?" Because everyone is just below. It's like 15 dives in 2 days. And Dan's words were from Mel Fisher. He said, "Today's the day. You never know. Today's the day." And that was a famous line that Mel Fisher always said when he was looking for the Otocha. So anyway, Dan and I hopped in the water, went back to where we were, this area that we had found. I was working on a gunner's trophy. Dan was literally next to me here. There was a little shelf coming out like this, a wreckage. And we're working away, and I look over, Dan suddenly reaches up with his arm like this. I said, "Oh, what's that?" Picks something up, looks at it, and puts it in the sleeve of his sweatsuit. I was still in the water when he got back to the boat, and I think Steve was the one that identified the ring. It was the ring that he had picked up. Fast forwarding, maybe a year later, he finally got a hold of Mrs. Calhoun. When he introduced himself, and he didn't say what he found. He said, "I dove the destroyers and I found something." She said, "Did you find his ring?"
No way.
Yes.
That's beautiful.
That's so amazing that you guys were able to find that ring.
But why else would you be calling her?
Yeah.
But what a sharp as a tack lady.
She was an elderly lady.
Yeah.
At the time.
Yeah, I found a button,
It was like a Disneyland wreck where you just go down, into the different apartments, plucking stuff off the shelves.
Yeah, here's his bedroom, and here's his nightstand, and there's the ring sitting on it.
Right. This is hell underwater.
Yeah.
This is absolute hell underwater.
Yeah.
1 year, we made 13 trips from Santa Barbara, running up there. We stay at the boathouse, go around the corner, and 13
Microphone.
trips. We tried getting in 13 times to Honda, didn't get in once.
Yeah.
And to have 2 days and the water clarity and the water warmth. I think Ben was growing gills, but anyway, it was awesome.
Yeah.
Dive.
Hey guys,
All right,
honestly, I just really wish that I had met you before I met the movie, because there's so much that I would have loved to know. I'd reached out to a couple of leads that I had on the diving societies and people that have been a part of it, and I tried to reach you guys, and I'm so happy to, because just so everybody knows, with the Department of Defense, I have a letter of intent for them to back me in the scripted version of this movie.
Very cool.
I want to talk to you guys.
All right. Well, Lee, we're going to wrap it up tonight. I'm sure you'll be around for questions afterwards, but thank you all. Thank you for joining us.
Plus, I got
tonight.
my 6'6" beast of a 15-year-old here that I'm sure wants to.
Yeah. Thank you all for joining us. If you're watching online, we do this every week. Tune in next week, and we'll see you later at the Adventures Club of Los Angeles.
Hey, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And then I've got to get a little certificate for you. So
oh, really? Oh, far out.